They will have you believing that the biggest threat to American democracy, as they call it, is QAnon. Fringe, unhinged conspiracy theorists who believe insane things about Donald Trump, so they say. But if you look to the riots in the streets, if you look to the actual destruction and damage, it's not QAnon doing it. And don't get me wrong, I think the Q stuff is completely off the rails, and many of these people have been duped, and it's particularly sad. Recently, Tucker Carlson got slammed because he basically said they were nice, gentle people, and for the most part, when you watch these CNN clips about QAnon, you just see a bunch of people who believe things that kind of make no sense. I'm not freaking out about it. Now, as for the people who stormed into the Capitol, who had the Q symbol and all that stuff, that's the worst of it. But not everybody who went into the Capitol stormed in. While we can all accept that was dumb, that was bad, that was dangerous, and it's unfortunate people lost their lives, I'm sorry. QAnon is not the biggest threat this country faces. Do you want to know what is? Probably not even this next point, but I'll tell you what is a big threat to American democracy. Maybe even the biggest. Blue Anon. You may have heard this term. It's been going around more and more, and I've been using it for quite some time. I think it was actually Jack Posobiec who coined the term, but Blue Anon is basically these leftist conspiracies that have establishment backing. I'll tell you what. When you follow people like Mike Cernovich or Jack Posobiec, prominent Trump supporters, they will tell you that the Q stuff is not real. But if you follow Rachel Maddow, if you follow the New York Times, they will tell you Blue Anon stuff is real. And they will tell you we need 25,000 National Guard troops fencing and razor wire surrounding the Capitol because of it. They take things from a simple truth, a small fact, and they stretch it beyond recognition. This is how the media operates, mind you. So is it true that people stormed the Capitol? Yes. Was it bad? Of course it was bad. Were these people, was it ill-conceived, dangerous, and outright stupid? Oh, definitely. Like, to think that you're going to enter a physical government building and then take the government was nuts. But you take a small thing like that. Granted, I understand. It's a big deal. I'm not going to pretend like it's the apocalypse or anything, but that's what they do. You have this one main event with, I think it was a total of 800 people, so I read, that entered the Capitol building, and there are about 3,000 outside of it. That translates now into March 4th, the militia will attack the Capitol. We must have 5,000 more troops. And then when nothing happens, what do they say? We're going to extend the National Guard lockdown in D.C. for 2 more months. Let me tell you how crazy and dangerous this is. I have no problem being critical of QAnon and pointing that out on this show. There are many people who are into alternative media who will equally point out we must get our facts straight. The media will also point out that these Q people are over the top, but they'll take it very, very far. And you know what? Fine. Be critical of those you disagree with. But what happens when you criticize Blue Anon, when you point out that the left is pushing similar unhinged conspiracies resulting in violence and destruction? The big lie of the left. We saw this in the data. When you ask people how many unarmed black men were killed by police, liberals say the plurality, over 1,000. That's the big lie. The media keeps telling that there's this dangerous thing that's happening. These things, like the Russiagate stuff, they are not based in reality. But the left just believes it because the establishment pushes it. So I tell you this. When I hear a conspiracy theory from the right or the left, I typically will approach it from, show me the evidence. When the conspiracy theory on the right falls apart, I'll say that's not true. And the left, I'll say the same thing. But what happens when the leftist conspiracies are debunked? Does the mainstream media come out and say, we were wrong about this? We're so sorry. No. Case in point, I can talk about a news cycle news story where I can say something like Donald Trump's approval rating in aggregate is higher than it's ever been, which happened when he was giving his press conferences. In the context of that day, the story makes a lot of sense when I'm like, wow, people really do approve of Trump. A month or two later, when Donald Trump's approval rating collapses, you will have establishment types take clips from yesterday and apply it to today as though it's this in today's context. This is the problem with how the media operates and how Blue Anon operates. The media can claim Trump is a Russian asset. They can go on MSNBC and say all these things. But when it comes to today, when we know that's all completely bunk and debunked, what happens? No one takes that clip and then plays it on CNN or NBC or CBS and says, boy, were we wrong about this. They just ignore it. The establishment supports it. Let me show you something. So we have this story from MEAWW. They say, there's a tweet from, I think they have the tweet from Jack Posobiec. He says, I have never even heard of a word being banned from Urban Dictionary before they banned Blue Anon. They do ban words. Urban Dictionary has banned many things they've deemed to be culturally insensitive. But they actually deleted the entry for Blue Anon. Why? It's just a phrase that someone uploaded. On Urban Dictionary, you can post, hey, there's a phrase people use, here's what it means. It's Urban Dictionary. So as more and more people started talking about the threat of Blue Anon, Urban Dictionary deleted it. They deleted it. Now, they have brought it back, but let me explain the seriousness of the threat that is Blue Anon. Urban Dictionary says, Blue Anon is a loosely organized network of Democrat voters, politicians, and media personalities who spread left-wing conspiracy theories such as the Russian hoax, Jussie Smollett hoax, Ukraine hoax, Covington kid hoax, and Brett Kavanaugh hoax. Blue Anon adherents fervently believe that right-wing extremists are going to storm Capitol Hill any day now and remove lawmakers from office, hence the need for the deployment of thousands of National Guard stationed at the D.C. Capitol. It's true. They believe this stuff. And it is very, very dangerous for us because we now have thousands of National Guard deployed for what reason? Unfortunately, the mainstream press, the corporate press, I shouldn't say mainstream, I don't like it, corporate press will tell you this stuff is real. And when it's proven false, they won't tell you it's false. So there are people who still believe this insanity. Boy, I tell you, I have heard some of the craziest and most unhinged conspiracies from the left that are still propped up by establishment press today. Some of them involve me. It's insane. They make things up about me or others, and the media runs with it. And they say, one user claimed this, and it must be true. That's where we are. MEAWW says, American conservative author and political commentator Candace Owens has provided a new conspiracy theory for those who continue to support former President Donald Trump. Owens took to Twitter on Sunday to mock people who say Trump fans are a nonstop threat to D.C., calling them Blue Anon believers, and hit out at moaning Markle before her Oprah interview. She said, if you believe D.C. is under military occupation because there are nonstop threats from Trump supporters, Joe Biden is the most popular American president of all time. Russia, Russia, Russia. You might be Blue Anon, wrote Owens. And then they just showed the tweet. The term Blue Anon is an obvious play on QAnon, a disproven and discredited American far-right conspiracy theory alleging that a cabal of awful people do awful things. I don't want to get into that because, YouTube will probably knock this channel down. But let me just say, the Q stuff is more than just what they claim it is when they talk about an evil cabal of people who are, kidnapping people, children. They say the term Blue Anon was immediately called out by many who saw this as an attempt to gaslight people. One Twitter user said, Republicans are using Blue Anon to deflect from the fact that their base and dear leader Trump is CEO of conspiracy theories. Donald Trump certainly believes dumb things, and I have absolutely no problem being critical of QAnon. But you see the problem here? The establishment press has no problem criticizing Q, but they can't accept it themselves, even though we know Jussie Smollett, hoax. Brett Kavanaugh, hoax. Russia, hoax. Ukraine gate, hoax. Twitter suppressed a story about Hunter Biden just before the election, and then a month later, after the election was over, admitted it was all true. You see the danger here? When you whip up violent lunatics to go riot and destroy cities, and you keep defending the lie. They say Trump's big lie is the election was stolen. Well, the left has a big lie as well, and it pertains to police brutality and it pertains to race. They whipped up people to go and burn down entire cities, figuratively, okay? I was the entirety of the whole city. I'm talking about many of these cities saw widespread destruction, vandalism, death. Kamala Harris funded this, solicited donations to bail the rioters out. Did Donald Trump solicit donations to bail out the Q people? No. Are Republicans defending the Q people? No, of course not. You see the problem here? We regular people, those that don't want any violence and want peaceful transitions and calm, rational understanding, are rightly concerned about both. But forgive me if I'm not going to scream to the high heavens about the dangers of QAnon when what do they do for the most part? Wave little American flags and complain and say dumb things? I'm talking specifically about these CNN segments where you have one guy saying like Trump's going to be inaugurated, mark my words, and then nothing happens. Nothing happens because it's not going to happen. Joe Biden is the president. It's just it. On the left, though, they can literally believe insane conspiracies about police officers hunting down minorities throughout the streets, go and burn down and buildings and cause $2 billion in damage. And the media supports all of it. That's the big lie. And there's no one to call it out. Because when people like me, when we call it out, the establishment just has more cultural power, period. A lot of people call them the left, but the actual leftists aren't big fans of the neoliberal establishment. So it's just the establishment. I think it's better to call it the establishment. However, the leftists often do line up behind the establishment Democrats when they need to or when it benefits them. So therein lies the bigger problem. Plus, many of these leftists actually are critical race theorists. So they do overlap with, the establishment. This guy on Twitter says, Blue Anon is the hysterical term the radical right is using to gaslight people into thinking none of the BS Trumpies do is real. That's not true at all. A bunch of right-wing people did a bunch of really dumb things. Absolutely. And if you don't want to accept that Trump has his faction of, deranged supporters, well, then you are lying to yourself. But I'm not going to pretend it's the biggest threat in the world. Because when one of these Q people posts their conspiracy theory, they get banned from Twitter. So why should I care? I think the ideas are bad, many of them, and I'll call them out. More so than Tucker Carlson would. Tucker Carlson said they were like gentle people or something. Listen, unhinged conspiracies deserve to be called out as unhinged conspiracies. But they have no institutional authority. The left does. The establishment does. Another tweet. This guy says Republicans are using Blue Anon to deflect. If you, Amy Lynn says, if you believe in Blue Anon, you also believe that unicorns fart rainbows. Blue Anon is a term to describe the fact that the Covington kids thing was a hoax. Jussie Smollett, hoax. That woman at Smith College, hoax. Brett Kavanaugh, hoax. Russiagate, hoax. Ukrainegate, hoax. Or I suppose, depending on how you talk about Ukrainegate, if you want to say that Joe Biden did get a prosecutor fired who was investigating a company where his son was on the board, that really happened. And it was only after the election they were like, yeah, but it was okay that he did it. Right. They say at the same time, it was also embraced by conservatives and far-right commentators like Jack Posobiec, who said, you might be Blue Anon if you think Brett Kavanaugh did these things right. Let me show you something. Let's talk about Q. From Newsweek. QAnon theorists switch date to March 20th after no Trump inauguration, call the 4th a false flag. I tweeted, it's a cult, when I saw this story, because you have a faction of people who genuinely believe this. I have no problem criticizing them. But let's play a little game. It's called Let's Weigh the Threats We Face. Newsweek says, let me read this for you. You're going to love this. You're going to absolutely love it. As federal law enforcement agencies braced for Q conspiracy theorists to engage in potential acts of violence on Thursday, leading affiliates of the far-right extremist movement seemed to amend formerly held beliefs about the significance of March 4th. Now, while I believe the greater Q community does not actually follow this, and they've been critical of it, there are a lot of people who do believe every single time Trump doesn't get inaugurated, they just move the date, they change it, and they try and justify. I know because I've actually talked to some of these people in the past couple of months, asking them why they believe this stuff. My favorite, absolute favorite and most important thing right here, check it out. Some QAnon supporters seemed to rebrand the March 4th conspiracy in the wake of community suspicion, while two individuals affiliated with the false theories simply suggested that Trump's inauguration would take place sometime in the spring. One man, identified as Ken, told the Washington Post reporter Dave Weigel that the former president will be inaugurated again on the 20th in comments over the weekend. Ken also believes that Trump is still in command of the military and Biden is acting as president as a ruse while the Pope and others are rounded up. Bravo, Washington Post, for tracking down Ken. Ken. Who? What? You found some random guy who believes stupid BS and you wrote a news article for it for Washington Post? Amazing. I used to only joke that such absurdities were a real thing. You may have seen news articles where they say, a source close to Nancy Pelosi's office confirms. And then you're like, what does that mean? Or they'll say a source familiar with Trump's thinking said. I love that one. A source familiar with Trump's thinking says that he's outraged that he had his Twitter account banned. Well, who is this psychic person that you've spoken with? I usually make jokes. They'll say, a source close to Nancy Pelosi's office says, and the source close to her office will be a homeless guy in the alley behind her office who was found and then started ranting about how the moon is made of cheese. And they'll be like, oh, this guy this source close to Nancy Pelosi's office said that she was secretly working for the communists in China to take over the country. And it's some ranting lunatic guy in the back going like, oh, Nancy Pelosi, she's working for China. And it's insane. I didn't think they'd actually do it. I was just I was exaggerating to make a point. But here we go. The Washington Post found some random guy named Ken and wrote an article about it. Should I go out, walk down the street and find some random guy, ask him his stupidest belief, and then write an article saying it's a danger we all face because I spoke with one guy whose name was Bill, who told me that Martians are coming? For real. And they tell us this is the biggest threat. Now, did you find Donald Trump Jr. or Kushner or Trump Sr. or Ivanka or even Jack Posobiec or Cernovich to tell you these unhinged conspiracies? You didn't. You found someone with no influence who has no title, just some random guy named Ken, and then claimed, there we go, it's happening. It's absolutely psychotic BS. I've seen the Blue Anon stuff. It's actually creepy stuff. You have CNN, MSNBC, NBC, ABC. Not only do they believe this stuff, not only do they pump out lies for which never get corrected, when they do get corrected, when the stories are proven false, these networks don't do anything. Case in point, when the New York Times reported that law enforcement officials say that Officer Sicknick at the Capitol died due to blunt force trauma to the head. According to sources, they say, who, when, what are the sources? This was used as evidence in the impeachment trial. And then after the impeachment trial was over, what happened? The New York Times quietly went in and issued an update. Oh, actually, that didn't happen. The Daily Mail actually spoke with the officer's mother, and she said he didn't die of a fire extinguisher. He died of a stroke, like a day later, totally unrelated. Oh, no, it had nothing to do with the riots. There you go. When the media pushes unhinged conspiracies that rile people up and they try and use it to impeach, at the time, a former president, I'm sorry, but American democracy, as they call it, is very much being destroyed by them. And I'm sorry, my friends, but I'm not optimistic that, well, let me rephrase. I'm actually a bit optimistic in many capacities, but I'm not optimistic we're going to get out of this one and go back to the way things used to be. I'm optimistic that the establishment is collapsing and these stories are proof they're becoming insanely desperate. But it's not going to be the way it was before. There's going to be a new normal, and that's a bad thing for a lot of reasons. But I do think ultimately that the good guys will prevail. I do. As Michael Malice says, if they were winning, the propaganda would not be necessary. There you go. They need to find a way to justify having all of these soldiers in D.C., so they write some garbage article about some dude they found in an alley living by the dumpster who's got some crazy beliefs. I am exaggerating. I don't know where this guy lives. But think about how insane it is that a mainstream major publication would track down some random dude, ask him about his random nonsensical beliefs, and then publish an article and tell you to be scared, be threatened, because these people won't stop ever. Got to have 5,000 troops in D.C.? No. It's time to end the occupation of Washington, D.C. I can't, no. You know, I was going to say I can't imagine, but I can. I feel bad for the National Guardsmen who are down there. Think about this. These people are so loyal to the country, to the system, that even when they're fed raw beef, raw chicken, and food with metal shavings in it, which they were, even when they're told to sleep in a parking garage with one bathroom and one power outlet, they do. They don't defy the orders. They do it. At a certain point, however, that does worry me. All these National Guards men and women who are willing to endure such humiliation and disrespect because, well, they have a job, because they swore an oath, and they're going to follow their chain of command. In the face of that humiliation and disrespect, I am, well, honored, I suppose, to have these people, serving as our National Guard. It is tremendous, the things they're willing to endure to keep us safe. But what's scary? What orders would they be willing to follow for that same system? We hear just following orders is never an excuse. Well, the police do it. The National Guard is doing it right now. The National Guard standing around D.C. with razor wire, keeping out American citizens from their own capital, which they're allowed to walk around. This is authoritarianism on the rise. And you can clearly see National Guards men and women will not only follow any order they're given. I shouldn't say necessarily any order, but these seemingly nonsensical ones. But even in the face of humiliation, they'll just follow these orders. There's pros and there's cons. As I said, it takes a strong person to be humiliated to that degree, but still stand firm and defend, their oath. But it's also scary that you can have these people absolutely humiliated at this point, doing something nonsensical and authoritarian, and they will still just do it. Authoritarianism doesn't come it doesn't come overnight. There won't just be one day where a train rolls up and say, all aboard. That's not how it works. It's every day it gets worse. Every day we see the media push these unhinged paranoid delusions and demonize anyone who opposes them. They're allowed to do it. And then they'll start telling people to go to the COVID hotels like in Canada. Then they'll start saying you can't travel, you can't leave the country. Then they'll start saying you can't leave your home. They've been doing it. And I'll tell you one thing. They'll tell you now, but all the COVID restrictions were justified and, we're going to ease things up. The CDC is now saying if you got vaccinated, you can, if you wear a mask or whatever, but you probably shouldn't travel. It's just degrees. So the next time they institute a mass lockdown, people will just be like, just like last time, and they'll go along with it. You see, you can't change a society overnight. If you go to someone and tell them to do something dramatically different, they will revolt. I'll give you an example. The one I love to give, eBay. eBay at one point had a yellow website. One day they turned the website white because they wanted a redesign. The users revolted. They were outraged. This is gross. It's ugly. It's too bright. Oh, I hate it. So they changed it back. But then every day after that, they slowly changed the yellow one shade towards white every day for like a year, until a year later the website was white and no one cared. You see how it works? You do it slowly and gradually. So now you've just had, we're facing the 1 year anniversary of 15 days to slow the spread, and everybody just accepts it. Everybody. Take a look at the masks. Someone made an interesting point. They said, if people were really concerned about you not wearing a mask because it was going to get them sick, they would just avoid you. When people harass you for not wearing a mask, it's actually because you're being disobedient. You're defying the collective. Perhaps. I don't think entirely, but I think it's an interesting point because we did have that one video where the guy yells, does anyone else think it's not fair that she doesn't have to wear a mask and we do? There's an actual video of that. For the most part, I got no problem wearing a mask. And I think, just whatever, who cares? You got to wear a shirt when you go shopping too, so I don't mind. The point is, when they do the lockdowns, when they take away your job, what's the next thing they'll do they think they can get away with? I suppose the media will just keep pumping out unhinged conspiracies and keep everyone convinced of it. They'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at 4 p.m. over at youtube.com/Timcast. Thanks for hanging out, and I will see you all then.